Hello and welcome to Theater Threshold Podcasts, a series of weekly podcasts designed to give students an insight to all the inner workings of the theater department and community at Cal State Long Beach. This week's podcast is brought to you by Feminist Theater Makers. FTM talks about the role gender has played in theater and the nuances of pronouns across languages. Let's get into it.
Hello, we're Feminist Theater Makers, and this is the Theater Threshold Podcast.
Yay!
Yay! All right, everyone, before we get started, remember to follow us on our social media pages. So if you want to follow our Instagram, that'll be at Feminist Theater Makers. And then if you want to go to our website, it's feministtheatermak.wixsite.com/feministcurious. So make sure to follow our socials. All right, let's dive right in.
Okay, hi. My name is Rory Smith. I'm the president of Feminist Theater Makers. I've been in the club since my freshman year, so I guess I'm going on my third year in the club. I'm a junior in college. My pronouns are she, her.
Nice. Hi everyone. I'm Ray. I have been a part of the club for probably about the same amount of time as Rory has. I started my sophomore year. And this year I am Rory's vice president and I'm editing our blog, which is awesome. My pronouns are they, them. And it's my last semester.
Okay, hi everyone. I'm Eileen. My pronouns are she, her, hers. Ta as well, but can't really. Never mind. You can't verbally hear the difference. It's more like a written thing in Mandarin, so this makes no difference to y'all.
You can tell us more about it later.
Yes.
Yes.
I'm going into my last year here at Long Beach. I'm head of marketing, and I've actually only been in the club for probably like a month, but I'm excited, so that's me.
Hi everyone, my name is Maddie Limas. Pronouns are they, them. I'm currently a junior at CSULB. I am member at large for Feminist Theater Makers. This is my first year and I'm super excited. Yeah.
Woohoo!
Yay!
Yeah, so if you don't know about us, Feminist Theater Makers is a group that started, I think, 4 years ago, in response to some events that happened in the department. One of those things was that there were some sexual assault claims that weren't being addressed, and so the department essentially just needed a group that was going to look out for the interests of its most underrepresented students. And then the other thing that kind of sparked the beginning of the group was a workshop on consent that was led by an outside group that didn't really give our students what they needed from that kind of workshop. So in response, we started doing the physical boundaries workshop every semester, which was a pretty okay replacement for some time. But we've also come to find that it can be really difficult to talk about and that there are a lot of nuances, especially when it comes to consent in theater. So one of our goals is to get a guest intimacy director to come and talk to the students once a semester, because we think that would be the best way to resolve that kind of issue. But in general, we're around just to help the students out with whatever they need and make sure everybody's voices are being heard.
Exactly. Thank you. We also, our name is Feminist Theater Makers, so we also focus on creating work sometimes. And so last semester we did a devised piece called How to Love a Feminist, and we have another piece of work coming up this year that we'll be beginning to devise pretty soon, and we'll debut in the spring, and we'll talk about that a little bit later in the podcast.
Yeah.
Let's get into it. Yeah, let's talk about gender. Let's talk about what gender means in art. Let's talk about gender in theater.
Let's do it.
Yeah, so as you guys heard, our need for intimacy director is so important. Not only for, I guess, things where intimacy like kissing and trauma is needed, but like also for different forms of violence and different forms of triggering things, racial violence, traumatic violence, and gendered violence. And I think it's gonna be interesting coming into the theater world as a weirdly gendered person. I identify as a weirdly gendered person. I'm non-binary, and so it's been interesting uh, entering into the theater world as such.
Yeah, I would have to
Yeah,
agree that being gender variant in a field in which a majority of the stories being told are through the lens of the binary can be it can feel somewhat limiting sometimes, even when it's like your job as an actor to transform. And I think it can be a huge asset to be gender variant because you can transform in so many which ways, but it's hard to get other people to see that um, because of such a rigid binary, especially within our storytelling. There's a pretty rich history of that, actually.
I'm glad you brought that up because that has also been my experience as well. Like I feel because I'm already comfortable in confronting certain ways in which my presentation of gender is inhibiting, like towards me as like a performer. I think of like other times where I've had to work with other actors, or even before I came out, when my idea of masculinity was like I wanted to perform that so much that even that affected my acting and affected my voice and how I was on stage. And since I've come out, like it's been really interesting, like exploring, I guess, new avenues of myself, new ways in which I guess I can access my emotional inner life, my gendered inner life, and like access new parts of characters that like I guess aren't questioned. I think something that was brought up in like a class last semester with Rory in my acting class was, I believe, Anna Steers. If you guys know Anna Steers, she's amazing. She brought up like many people just don't take for granted the gender of a character. They just assume that they're male, female, and they never really ask. They never really ask like, what's my character's relationship with gender? Like they never, and that's so much like work, and that's so much like a deep well of like valuable information.
And also too, with sexuality, like people could assume like maybe your character's married or they're in a relationship, but that doesn't mean that they're necessarily straight or they're necessarily gay, or just like it doesn't mean, that if they're not in a relationship they don't feel sexual attraction, because many people do. So it's just, I think it's good to kind of look through this lens of being open and questioning everything, even if it's something that you may assume like a cisgender, writer wrote for someone within the binary. Like that doesn't have to be the way you play it as a non-binary actor.
Yeah. Speaking of which, oh my gosh. um, yeah, I this is something that I have been thinking about a lot recently, and it has inspired my need to self-produce because uh I'm feeling as though there's not as much of a place for questioning gender and gender bending in the theater world because that's been so limiting to my perception of like how my career can be. I want to see if I can get other people to question it as well. That same exact thing of like, does this character really need to be gendered the way they are? Does it matter so much to the story? Sometimes it does. You look at different examples um, like Death of a Salesman. I don't know if you could really gender bend that. I don't know if those characters could be gender variant because so much of the conflict within that plot has to do with their masculinity and has to do with the way that they've been brought up in the world. Of course, like the individual actor can decide certain things about their character within reason. Um, but then there are other roles uh, that don't really need to be gendered the way that they are. Like, I know traditionally a lot of the fools in Shakespeare's work have been gendered as male, and that doesn't have to be the case. And I've seen really successful productions of Shakespeare where multiple characters have been gender bent, or have they've chosen to make it part of the plot that they are gender variant to great success. Like, I'll repeat that it does not really affect the plot in a negative way when you do that. In fact, I think it makes it richer. It makes it reflect life, real life more. Period.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember when I was in high school, like feeling like a gravitation towards Ariel from The Tempest. Because like
Totally.
they're like literally like a being of like transformation. They transform into like so many things, and I was like, oh wow, that's like things. And I was talking to Dr. Menifee, which if you guys don't know, she's teaching theater history this year. Um, Awesome, awesome, awesome. Yeah, I was talking to her after class about gender and performance because she was talking about ritual and performance, and I was like, interesting because I don't know if you guys have heard, but like there's always discussion about how gender is performative in some aspects. Um, and she's like, yeah, we'll get into it. And I think there's a section later on about the Shakespearean era of theater where that was like a playground for gender, really. Like, and she said that the theater then um, even though people attended it, it was like in the outskirts of town. You had to go out, and like that was like a place of like debauchery, kind of. You know what I mean? And so that was a place where people can really like, I guess, play with gender and like don't really have to deal with the, I guess, the constraints of having to deal with city life, and they can go out into this area, and yeah, it was interesting. If you guys don't have her, please take her. She's amazing.
Yeah, she's pretty incredible. I
Yeah.
think it's true that they could play with gender to an extent, but like still it was only cis men being let into that playing space, like the literal playing space on stage. Like, cis women weren't allowed to be there. And that brings up an interesting dichotomy, but I'll let Rory speak first.
Oh no, you basically said exactly what I was gonna say. It's like, it's crazy how there was so much like gender fuckery going on within the constraint of only cis men allowed to participate, you know?
Right, right. And
Or I mean like cis men presenting people, we don't fucking know, but like
mm,
women were out.
yeah, this for me brings up the article that I was telling these wonderful people about the other day that David Gorstein made us read for our dramatic theory class. But it's an article, yeah, Eileen knows. But it's an article by Sue Ellen Case, where she talks about ancient Greek theater and how they did a similar thing as in the Shakespearean era, where men were allowed to play the female roles. Men were also writing the female roles, which means that there started to become within like the theatrical tradition of the ancient Greeks this like fictional gender that was created um to represent women on stage that was like this ideal version of a woman. And that to me brought up so many other thought bubbles, you know? It was like, oh, then how does that play into like our perception of being trans now? And like our idea of the ideal woman is literally unattainable for any person who is born as a woman and then raised in society to be gendered as female. Um, because they will never be able to live up to this ideal womanhood because the only people who could perform those roles were men, or we're assuming they were men, um, when in reality they could very well have been gender variant, but without the terms for that yet. So I don't know, that just is really interesting to me, and how that part of the tradition of theater history has come down into like present day, and how powerful the theater can be in creating this kind of and upholding this idea of this fictional gender, this idealized female. And how can we as theater artists use our superpower of storytelling to change the way that we perceive gender now?
And I think a lot of the dialogue about gender has been a lot of very Western, limited. And I was asking Eileen, because in your pronouns, you include a character in your language, and I would love for you to talk about that, because it was an interesting conversation.
Yeah, for sure. So earlier in the podcast, I introduced my pronouns as she, her, and ta, which, my first language is actually Mandarin, and in the language of Mandarin Chinese, pronouns are not, when you hear them, if you just say ta, it could be boy or girl, non-binary, it's literally anyone, but when it's written, it has its specific, like, oh, this is a girl, this is a boy, sort of, that's the way it is distinguished. And what I think is interesting is that the boy, quote-unquote, version of, like, a pronoun is it's the character, it's like run, and run is literally person, and so that's kind of like, it literally makes it so that, like, the guy is, like, the normal, the default, exactly. And when you don't know someone's gender, you use ta as, like, the guy. Because I looked into this further, because there is no, like non-binary pronoun in the Mandarin language. You just use ta if you don't know, but technically ta is, like, he. And so, yeah, I think it's just interesting to, like, note, because, like, it's kind of hard because it's a podcast, so I can't show y'all exactly what I'm talking about. But if you just look up, like, she in Mandarin, you'll see that it has, like, a ni on the side. But when you look up he, it has, like, a run, like, side character, and run literally means person. So, yeah, I think it's really interesting because you can't hear the difference, but you can see it when it's written out. And just the fact that, yeah, what's, like, I guess the default is literally, like, a guy, you know? And there's no non-binary pronoun at all. So yeah, that was a little bit of our discussion. And yeah, there's...
Yeah, gender in different languages is like, it's a whole other thing. So much, like, almost every Romance language, it's like, that table has a gender. This chair, that has a gender.
Yeah.
This doorknob,
And when it's
gendered.
and it's
Like,
multiple
everything.
items or multiple people of many genders, the default is the male version of the
male.
word. Yeah.
Yeah. And so it's been interesting. I've looked into, like, gender identities and, like, LGBT community in Mexico, and it's so interesting. It's like they have, you guys know, like, the ballroom era was, like, back in, like, Harlem area, like, in New York, but it's recently got a resurgence in Mexico. Actually, there's, like, houses that function in the same way, currently running now in Mexico. And it's been interesting, like, how they've experienced gender. There's, certainly within America, within the Latinx community, some people have added an E instead of the O or A. So Latin E, which is, like, interesting. I don't know. I'll have to look further into it, but yeah, it's been interesting because so much of the language is gendered.
I mean, yeah, in Oaxaca, there's the society they have a third gender, the Muxes, which are, like, these in-between type of people, and it's existed for many, many years. I mean, plenty of cultures have been totally hip to it before we have. Like, that's important to note. I could talk about this all day, but we can't.
I know. So we're just scratching the surface, basically.
Yeah.
But
If you're curious about it, come talk to us
podcast
more.
comes to an end, we just want to remind you guys, you folks, what we are doing for the rest of the semester. Maddie, take it away with the peer mentorship.
Yeah, so this year we're premiering our new thing. It's a new program. It's called the Peer Mentorship Program, where students who are part of student orgs, that means Feminist Theater Makers, Theater Threshold, Artists in Black, and Student Association of Theater Arts, they're able to mentor and become, like, buddies with, like, new incoming students, as well as, like, returning students from previous semesters. It's been interesting. We just finished up doing our running through our survey yesterday, so we already have our our mentees, as I guess you can say, selected, and we're going to meet them soon. So stay tuned for that if you're signed up.
Awesome. That's such a great way to get involved. Another great way to get involved is by submitting to the Feminist Theater Maker blog, Feminist Curious. Our next issue is going to be all about theater throwbacks. So if you have a fun photo that you want to share with a story attached to it, then you should send that into our email, feministtheatermakers@gmail.com. Theater spelled R-E, not E-R. And you might get to get featured in our blog. So submit.
Yes, exactly. And then one more way that you could potentially get involved is that we are doing a project for the week of, I think it's called like the week of research, scholarship, and creative endeavors, something along those lines. In the spring is when that week is going to be happening, but we decided that we wanted to devise a piece based on voting and based on discussions with people on what their personal relationship is to voting. So stay tuned for more information about that. We will probably have audition opportunities and the like. But yeah, those are some of the things that we are up to as a group this semester. Eileen, would you like to plug the media again?
Yes. Right as we are closing off our podcast, just a reminder to follow us on our social media pages. Once again, our Instagram is at Feminist Theater Makers. It's again R-E, not E-R. Our website, if you would like to check out our blog already and a little bit more about us, that is feministtheatermak.wix, as in W-I-X, site.com/feministcurious. So just take note of that. And yeah, those are our socials. And follow our Gmail as well, or email us. Don't follow it. That's weird. Never mind.
Yeah, it's been so fun talking. We are excited to meet you guys.
Yeah.
All of you guys. All of you folks. Again, thank you, Rory. Yeah.
Yeah, keep questioning gender, keep making good art, and tune in to next week's Theater Threshold podcast.
Yes. Thank you so much for listening. Bye.
Awesome.
Bye.
That was the student organization Feminist Theater Makers. Make sure to check out their weekly blog, Feminist Curious, as well as keep an eye out for their voting poll. Coming up this Friday is the Theater Threshold production Cam Ross 2.0. Witness the return of Cameron Alvarez as Bob Ross in the highly anticipated sequel. Cam Ross 2.0 only shows once this Friday at 12 p.m., so don't miss it. Next week, we have our regularly scheduled podcast on Tuesday at 6 p.m., featuring the Student Organization of Theater Arts in the first episode of The Stranger, that Friday at 12. Thank you for listening to this week's Theater Threshold podcast.